What's up everyone? Welcome back to Friends with Benefits, where we bring you all the latest in car culture, auto tech, and that sweet community vibe. Today we're diving into something a bit forbidden, the top 10 cars banned from the US. Yep, we're talking about the ones that got away, from the iconic Nissan Skyline R34, you know, the one from Too Fast and Too Furious, to the insane Porsche 959 that was just too advanced for Uncle Sam's taste. And don't even get me started on the TVR Sagaris, a car that basically said, airbags, never heard of them. We're breaking down the fastest, wildest, and downright coolest cars you can't legally drive here. And while you're at it, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Which of these cars would you risk it all to drive? Let's get into it. You've heard the legend, Godzilla, but with wheels instead of fire breath. That's the Nissan Skyline GTR R34. Damn, that's a mouthful. A car that literally has people salivating when they see it in video games, movies, or pretty much anywhere it's allowed to roam free. It's so beloved in pop culture that it starred alongside Paul Walker in Fast and Furious. It's the kind of car that makes you want to do donuts in a parking lot just to feel something again. But America, nope. Sorry, not today. The R34 was banned in the US because it was too powerful for our roads and too cool for our bureaucrats. It didn't meet some super boring regulations like EPA emissions tests, DOT safety standards, and probably wasn't up for voting in the midterms either. Basically, the R34 was like, nah, I don't need your rules. And the US was like, well, you ain't coming in. Let's break it down. The R34 packs a twin turbocharged RB26 DET inline-6 engine. This thing wasn't just fast, it was a missile with tires. It could pump out 276 horsepower, which back then was practically like launching yourself into orbit. Plus, it had an advanced Atiza ETS all-wheel drive system, meaning it stuck to the road like gum on your shoe. But apparently, US regulators didn't like the idea of regular Joes becoming street racers overnight. But after 25 long years, we've got some great news. The GTR is finally eligible for import, so you'll be able to roll into your local cars and coffee like an absolute legend, no longer needing that Hot Wheels version to keep your dreams alive. The real deal is finally within reach. Imagine this, you're behind the wheel of a TVR Sagaris, which looks like the result of a night out between a jet fighter and a sci-fi spaceship. This British beauty is light, aggressive, and fast. Basically a car that takes zero prisoners. So what's the catch? Oh, nothing serious, except that it lacks airbags, ABS, and, wait for it, stability control. That's right, the TVR Sagaris basically said, safety, we don't need no stinking safety. And honestly, the US government felt the same way. They didn't want to deal with the potential lawsuits after someone drove this thing into a tree at 120 miles per hour. This car was designed for pure drive and joy, but in a very hold on tight because you might not make it kind of way. You know how most modern cars try to save you from yourself with a ton of safety features? Yeah, the TVR Sagaris is not one of them. It's like that friend who double dares you to jump off the roof into the pool. Fun in theory, disastrous in execution. The engine, a 4.0 liter inline-6. The horsepower, a respectable 406 GP, which is enough to propel this lightweight rocket down the road with a terrifying mix of speed and chaos, but without those pesky airbags or any real safety net. It's a death trap on wheels. That's probably why the US decided to say, hey, nice car and all, but we'd rather keep our citizens alive. Thanks. So, if you're looking for a car that's less safe, controlled fun, and more possible near-death experience, the TVR Sagaris is for you, just not in the US. Maybe take it to a track day in Britain where they laugh in the face of danger. The Porsche 959 is that supercar you always dreamed of as a kid. The one that looked like it could fly if it needed to. And for a while, it might as well have, because no one in the US was allowed to own one. Not even Bill Gates, the actual tech wizard, could get his hands on it right away. See, when Porsche dropped the 959 in the 1980s, it was a technical marvel. A car so far ahead of its time, people had to check their watches to see if they were still in the right decade. Twin turbocharged with all-wheel drive and a 200 miles per hour top speed, it was basically the supercar equivalent of a mic drop. But while Europe got to enjoy this marvel, the US did what it does best. Wrapped it up in red tape and said, sorry, too dangerous, too fast, too everything. You see, back in the day, Porsche didn't send over the proper paperwork to get the 5.9 street legal. They didn't have time for things like EPA regulations or crash testing. So the US said, cool car, but you can't play with it. Even rich people like Bill Gates had to wait until the show and display law was passed to legally bring this bad boy into the States. And even then, they could only drive it for 2,500 miles a year. Imagine owning a car that can outpace a Ferrari, but you're only allowed to take it out on Sundays to show off to your neighbors. Talk about frustration. It's like being invited to the best party ever, but getting stuck outside because your name isn't on the list. That's the Porsche 5.9 in America. It's an exclusive, rare banned car that we can only ogle at in YouTube videos, just like the one you're watching right now. Alright, picture this. You've got a Lotus Elise Series 1, a car that weighs about as much as your grocery shopping. It's nimble, it's quick, it's a surgeon on corners. You're flying down a mountain road, feeling like Lewis Hamilton, and then it hits you. There's no airbags. The Lotus Elise Series 1 was built to be as light as possible, and apparently that included forgetting important things like safety features. The engineers were like, weight reduction bro, and they weren't kidding. This car tips the scales at about 1,600 pounds, which is roughly the weight of a couple of golden retrievers, but it can still do 0 to 60 miles per hour in 5.8 seconds. Impressive, right? But here's the problem. The US government kind of likes airbags, a lot, and safety standards too. Without those fluffy little balloons to save you in a crash, the Elise was sent packing. The US said, look, we appreciate the effort, but we're gonna need some crash tests and seatbelt checks before we let you loose on our highways. It wasn't until the later models of the Elise that we finally got to drive one here in the US, but by then, it had gained a bit of weight. So if you want the raw, no frills, hold on for dear life version, you're out of luck. Unless you move to the UK, where airbags are optional, but T is mandatory. The Jaguar XJ 220 wasn't just fast, it was stupid fast. At one point, it was the fastest production car in the world. A car that made even Ferrari and Lamborghini take a step back and say, hold up, who invited this guy? But you know what the XJ 220 couldn't outrun? The EPA. You see, this beauty was built for speed, not for the environment. It didn't exactly pass the emissions test with flying colors. In fact, it failed them miserably, belching out more pollutants than a fleet of 1970s muscle cars. And let's be real, the US government isn't too keen on a car that leaves a carbon footprint the size of Texas. Under the hood, you've got a 3.5-liter twin-turbo V6, which might sound modest until you realize it could pump out 542 horsepower and hit 217 miles per hour. That's faster than most people's Wi-Fi. The real kicker, the XJ 220 was supposed to come with a V12, but Jaguar decided to downsize the engine to a V6 last minute. Buyers were furious. It's like ordering a filet mignon and getting a cheeseburger instead. Still, it was fast enough to break records, and that's all anyone cared about, except the US, of course. They cared about air quality and, not dying in a fiery crash. So, while the rest of the world got to enjoy this aristocratic speed machine, the US said, we'll pass thanks. Now it's a unicorn, a car that you can spot in the wild only if you're incredibly lucky or incredibly rich. The Toyota Hilux, the truck that refuses to die. You could throw this thing off a cliff, run it through a war zone, or even set it on fire, and it'd still come back purring like a kitten. If the zombie apocalypse ever happens, forget your bunker, you'll want a Hilux. So why then can't we have this indestructible wonder in the US? Safety features, or rather, the lack of them. The Hilux was banned because it didn't have enough airbags, crash protection, or general, we don't want you to die in a crash technology. In other parts of the world, the Hilux is a legend, a true workhorse that can survive anything. But here in the US, the government was like, listen, we know you're tough, but you're not meeting our safety standards. It's the equivalent of a bodybuilder who can bench press a car but can't figure out how to use a seatbelt. So we're left with regular trucks that break down if you look at them wrong, while the rest of the world gets to enjoy the unstoppable Hilux. It's a cruel joke, really. Koenigsegg's motto might as well be speed first, ask questions later. The Agera RS is a car that makes no apologies. With a top speed of over 277 miles per hour, this car doesn't just break records, it shatters them and walks away without looking back. But the Agera RS was a bit too much car for the US to handle. Why? Because while it can hit warp speed, it can't pass US safety and emission standards. The boring stuff like airbags crash testing and making sure it doesn't explode when you turn it on. The Agera RS is like a superhero that doesn't follow the rules. It's the car equivalent of the Flash, but with no concern for speed limits or laws of physics. It's too fast for its own good, which is probably why the US government took one look at it and said, yeah, we're gonna need you to calm down. Even if you manage to import one, good luck using it as anything other than a garage ornament. There are few roads where you could legally test out its top speed without getting arrested or launched into orbit. The Alfa Romeo 8C Spider is like the James Bond of cars, sexy, dangerous, and irresistible. It's got curves that could make a grown man weep, and the kind of power that makes you wonder why anyone bothers with speed limits. But like most things that are too good to be true, there's a catch. The Spider version of the 8C never made it to the US because, well, safety. Apparently the car's stunning good looks weren't enough to distract regulators from its lack of structural integrity. Alfa was like, but look how pretty it is, and the US was like, yeah, we also want to not die in a crash. So while the Cooper version was allowed in, the Spider remains a dream for US car lovers. It's the Italian fling we can only admire from afar, like a vacation romance that ends too soon. The Peugeot 205 GTI is like that one foreign exchange student who's super cool but never comes to your school. It was tearing up the streets of Europe, but over in the US no one even knew what it was. The 205 GTI was banned because it didn't meet US emissions and safety standards. I guess we'll never know how fun this little French hot hatch could have been on American roads. It's like being invited to the biggest party in town and then being told, sorry, you're not on the list. But while we were stuck with less exciting options, the 205 GTI became a legend across the pond and we missed out. Thanks a lot, regulations. I guess we'll have to settle for watching videos of it on YouTube and pretending we know what we're missing. The roof CTR2, the last but not the least, is like a Porsche that went on steroids. It's based on the Porsche 911, but turned up to 11. Everything about this car screams power, from its twin turbocharged engine to its monstrous speed. It's the kind of car that makes other cars look like they're stuck in traffic even when they're moving. But here's the thing, the US said, whoa there buddy, we've got rules. And Ruff was like, rules? We don't follow rules, we make them. The CTR2 didn't bother with federal testing, and that's why it got banned. It's the car equivalent of showing up to school with no homework, but somehow still acing the test. Even though the CTR2 could probably outrun anything else on the road, it couldn't outrun the law. It's one of those cars that's so cool it's almost illegal. Oh wait, it actually is. And there you have it, folks. That's our roundup of the top 10 cars banned from the US. Cars so fast, dangerous, or downright rebellious that Uncle Sam said, not today. From the Nissan Skyline GTR R34 flexing its twin turbo power like a bodybuilder at the gym, to the TVR Sagaris daring you to drive without airbags, and the Porsche 959, which was so ahead of its time, even Bill Gates couldn't handle it. Don't forget about the Lotus Elise Series 1, which is basically a go-kart that forgot safety as a thing, and the Jaguar XJ 220, which made the EPA throw up its hands in defeat. These cars are the ones that got away, the automotive legends we can only dream of driving down our roads. But hey, that's what makes them so legendary, right? Before we go, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know, which of these cars would you risk it all to drive? Is there a banned car you think should have made the list? Drop it below. We're all about community here at Friends with Benefits. For me, the Nissan R34 is a personal favorite. I've used to have pictures of it everywhere, and seeing it in Fast and the Furious was amazing. But my top pick, gotta go with the Porsche 959, a car literally too good for its time. And remember, if the car you're driving doesn't make you feel like a superhero, then you're driving the wrong one. Catch you on the next one, where we'll be talking about more cars, more culture, and more of what makes this community great.